This is our first Beyond Silicon Valley Webex. Thank you for taking the time, whether you're live with us in Cleveland, here at Jumpstart, or you're around the world staying up late, or it's the middle of the night, or even tomorrow morning in some places. We're really excited that you've chosen to spend this hour with us to talk about this week's topic, the role of government. So let me first, with our panelists that are in attendance, just have folks do quick introductions. So Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Lisa Delp. I am currently an entrepreneur in residence with Lorain County Community College, and I am the former executive director for the Ohio Third Frontier. So longtime Ohioan, and very interested in what we're doing in Ohio and how that translates into other places and how our experience can really help others jumpstart. And with that, I'll throw it to Lee.
Thank you. I'm Lee Poseidon, Pandelis Poseidon to my Greek country people across the pond. And I'm a senior partner with Jumpstart. Welcome to the participants here. You're at our facility, obviously, and welcome to the participants around the world. Jumpstart is a nonprofit venture development organization dedicated to realizing entrepreneurial potential for the benefit of the economy. We're founded 10 years ago, have directly worked with over 400 companies, which have raised a little bit over $700 million in follow-on capital. Through our network of partners and collaborators, we have been able to help over 800 companies raise about $1.5 billion of additional funding and create 2,600 jobs directly and something close to 5,000 indirect jobs.
Great, thanks, Lee. So let's go to our panelists on the WebEx. Stephen, let's start with you. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm Stephen Colt. I'm speaking to you from Washington, D.C. I am the former senior advisor to Secretary Hillary Clinton at the State Department for Entrepreneurship. I started the Global Entrepreneurship Program at the State Department, which was an outgrowth of President Obama's speech at Cairo University in June of 2009. It was the first concerted effort by the U.S. government to spur the development of entrepreneurship, in that case in Muslim-majority countries. We had full-fledged programs which are still operating in Egypt, Indonesia, and Turkey, and secondary programs in Lebanon, Jordan, Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco. Since leaving the State Department, I now have a consulting firm, Colt & Company, LLC, which does entrepreneurship ecosystem development in emerging markets. Currently, we're working primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, in Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. I'm also a guest scholar at the Brookings Institution here in Washington, where I'm writing a book which is called World Peace Through Entrepreneurship. I have about a 30-year business background, mostly in the entertainment business. I was at Warner Brothers for a decade and was chief operating officer there. But I also have done several startups, and the most successful of those was, or is, a company based in Luxembourg called SES, which is today the world's largest private communication satellite company with 52 satellites distributing most of the commercial cable channels in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, like Al Jazeera and Sky Television and MTV and ESPN.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Charu, everybody has met you via the video lecture this week, but maybe just a brief introduction of yourself.
Sure. I'm the founder and chief scientific officer of Cardio Insight Technologies. I'm an immigrant entrepreneur to the Cleveland area. I came here to do my graduate studies in biomedical engineering from Cochin, which is in Kerala, India, and stayed on, transferred the technology out of the university, Case Western Reserve University, and I have leveraged government money to launch and make Cardio Insight successful.
Great, thanks, Charu. And last, our friend coming to us from Tunis, Tunisia. Hopefully we can hear you and you can hear us. Moez. Okay. Hey, Moez, we still can't hear you. So maybe just wave hello for now. Sorry, I know. Okay, I appreciate it. Luckily, you have a nice face for television, so it's great. Hopefully, we'll get you on shortly. Yeah, thanks, Moez. So Moez is, and I'll do Moez's introduction. Actually, Lisa and I both know him. He's with FSVC. He's a regional director based in Tunis, in Tunisia. Actually, Lisa and I both had the opportunity to do some work with Moez in Tunis around support of venture capital and access to capital for entrepreneurs. Charu, maybe I'll start with a question for you. And really, this is going to be, Suzanne, do we have a question from the, not yet? Okay, let me start with you, Charu. When you, just based on your own background growing up in India, the thought that government would end up playing a large role in helping you start your company, what sort of preconceived notions did you have? I know you were sort of a first-time entrepreneur with Cardio Insight. What sort of preconceived notions did you have around government support of entrepreneurship, and what surprised you in terms of being able to access capital here in Ohio?
Everything was a surprise, because coming from India, government wouldn't be my first line of choice of any kind of capital. The key is, when you're trying to get things off the ground, getting that capital in place, getting the team in place, getting everything off the ground in a timely manner is very important. So my fear was really, government means bureaucracy, means a lot of paperwork. They're not in my industry. They're not going to understand what the applications are, or the importance or relevance of this technology and why it should reach the marketplace. So I had a lot of apprehension with the word government because of my preconceived notions from my background.
Great, thanks, Charu. Lisa, you were a government official overseeing the program. I mean, as you started to sort of socialize this idea of, and the Third Frontier program is a big program in terms of scale, in terms of dollars, was it a typical reaction that you got from folks that were sort of a little wary about government involvement in backing entrepreneurship?
Yeah, when I came into a room and said, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you, I generally got a laugh and a lot of raised eyebrows. The Third Frontier is so unique in its approach to entrepreneurship and to the support of the ecosystem, because it doesn't rely on its, to use Charu's word, preconceived notions about what entrepreneurship should be. It actually looks to the experts in the community to find the best practices and to find the right path to move forward. And I think that really makes a huge difference, and it's allowed the program to be successful, and I think that's what will allow it to be replicated in other areas.
Lee, you just came back from Greece last week, and I know we have a number of folks in Athens that are at a meetup around this. Maybe you can comment on sort of having grown up in Greece and sort of being here. I mean, what were some of the things that you were hearing in Athens last week about the role of government in supporting entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I saw a tremendous amount of activity, and it's actually really exciting to see what Greeks as individuals, institutions, and even the government are trying to do to help entrepreneurship. Interestingly enough, I grew up in the late 60s under a dictatorship, and coming to the States to study economics, I became an Adam Smith and laissez-faire proponent. So I had always had a pretty healthy skepticism and suspicion of any government activities, and have to tell you that from my perspective, the Third Frontier program and what the state of Ohio has been able to accomplish is great proof of the catalyzing effect. I think somebody mentioned it earlier, that government can have to create that spark and to support entrepreneurial activities, reaching into and bridging the gap before actual investors come in. So very encouraged at what's going on in Greece. Great.
Stephen, let me go over to you. We had a number of comments in the discussion boards around the role of corruption. We had a comment from Edmund Noni in Sierra Leone, West Africa, who had talked about the challenges there around institutional corruption in the arms of government, and this could be a slippery slope in terms of awarding on the wrong grounds of collusion. Raquel Baligod from the Philippines made a comment about, in terms of the Philippine government programs, she said the most important criteria for you to be a successful grantee is that you need to know VIPs in the agency where you're applying for loans. You've done a lot of work, and I know you just did a really important study related to Ghana. Maybe you can talk about the challenges that you're seeing around, let's call it corruption and cronyism in other parts of the world in terms of government's role around entrepreneurship.
Well, I mean, I think that corruption is an enormous problem, and it is a widespread problem, and it exists in pretty much all of the places where I work. My general comment is that the most successful government programs tend to be macro about the ecosystem as opposed to micro and focused on specific companies and grants. So when you get to the point of, when the government is actually, picking winners, which is that, much commented upon expressions, then that's when the corruption is worse. When the government is doing things that spur the ecosystem as a whole, that's when government involvement tends to be at its best. And there are lots and lots of examples of that, starting obviously with the United States, where the role of government in entrepreneurship is, very well documented and clear. The beginning of DARPA, almost the entire biotech industry, essentially all of the artificial fibers and materials industry. These all grew out of very significant government-funded programs. The same is true, for example, in Israel, which is one of the most robust entrepreneurial ecosystems in the world, probably right now the most robust. So as long as the government programs are macro and ecosystem focused as opposed to micro and individual enterprise focused, the risk of corruption tends to be less.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Okay, now we have our inaugural question coming over the Webex. Anna? We think? Yes? Yes. Okay, all right, microphone.
Yes, we have a question from Tony Burry. Do you believe that there is a fundamental difference between democratic or non-democratic governments providing funds?
Lisa, do you want to take that first? Yeah.
Sure. I think I'm not sure that there is a fundamental difference in the type of government. I think it's the spirit of the intent of the assistance and the intent of the political forces that are applying those resources. If it is their intent to open up an economy and to encourage entrepreneurship and investment, then I think it's going to succeed. If it's just window dressing for the sake of international media, then perhaps it's not likely to be as successful. But I think it all comes back to what do they really want to get out of it, what are the goals, and is the community unified and moving behind that so everybody rises together.
Great. Lee, did you want to make a comment?
Sure. Not being an expert in political systems, I think there are some key components that you need to have almost in any system to make this work. From my perspective, transparency is probably on the top of that list. Vision and commitment by whatever political party to initiate this effort is key, because these efforts tend to be longer term, as we all know. So those components, accountability would probably be the third one. Those components are fundamental, I think, to making this work. And under the right conditions, I can see them working in multiple political environments.
Great. Anna and Suzanne, is there anybody from the chat? Please, for those who are asking questions from the chat, please identify what country you're from as well. Okay. 1 second. Live events, yes.
Tech.
Yeah.
We have a question from the audience. How has Third Frontier and JobsOhio morphed to support entrepreneurs under the current administration?
And maybe give some background for our viewers from around the world that may not. They may know for the Third Frontier, but maybe a broader question around when political leaders having the patience. A number of things that were in the chat room, and I know we've commented about the fact that oftentimes political election cycles are shorter than the length of time it takes to sort of see true progress under entrepreneurship. So maybe kind of address it on that in that way.
So a little bit of background. So the Ohio Third Frontier was enacted under Governor Bob Taft, a Republican leader here in Ohio, and it has survived through multiple administrations. Governor Ted Strickland, who was a Democrat, took the program on and enabled the expansion of the program with an additional $750 million. And Governor Kasich, another Republican who's now in office, has looked at the ecosystem and tried to put his own touch on it, improve on it. And one of the initiatives that he put in place was an organization called JobsOhio. And JobsOhio works very closely with the Ohio Third Frontier in a slightly different sector than the Third Frontier works. Third Frontier works on building the ecosystem and with the earlier stage company activities and the access to capital. JobsOhio was originally designed to work at the later stages to retain and recruit new organizations to Ohio. So I think it's a very symbiotic relationship. The Third Frontier builds up the companies, the supply chain, the new innovations and technologies that are attractive to companies who may want to locate in Ohio, and then JobsOhio goes out and helps them finalize that decision to come here and create jobs and create opportunity. So it really is a strong partnership, and I think it represents the entrepreneurial nature of the Ohio Third Frontier. It evolves and it changes over time. If it were to stay the same thing now that it was when it started, I think we would not have the successes that we do. We have to move with the times and evolve as the programs do and as additional needs are identified.
And Stephen, maybe you can comment on this long time lag in terms of sort of seeing the success of entrepreneurship and some of the work that you've done overseas. How do you convince political leaders to be patient with these programs?
Well, obviously it's a question of different strokes for different folks depending on what country you're working in. There's no question that the regulatory environment, the political environment are indispensable to success in these entrepreneurship promotion programs. But it is a symbiotic thing, and in other words, one of the many reasons. The first chapter of my book is called 99 Reasons Entrepreneurship is Good for You. And one of the 99 reasons is that entrepreneurs tend to also pressure the government to reform the regulatory system, increase transparency, provide for better business practices. So it is a symbiotic thing. And as the genie is let out of the jar and entrepreneurs become more and more active in the economy, it tends to accelerate and solidify improvements that happen in the country. And there are lots of case studies for this. Korea is a very good example of a place where, as entrepreneurship grew, pressure on the government grew. China is probably one of the best examples today, because while we can debate the extent to which it's an entrepreneurial-driven economy versus a state capitalism-driven economy, as people feel, there's no question that the role of business and successful entrepreneurs in pressuring the government for increased and improved and sustained regulation is really important. So it's important to think about this in a symbiotic way. Having said all of that, there's no question that this is not an overnight phenomenon. There's not a silver bullet that makes it all, turn around. It's a long slog, and it requires a lot of people to stay focused and hold politicians' feet to the fire.
Great. Question from the chat.
Yes. This is a question from Margot. What types of companies or what stages of companies would you encourage to apply for government funding? And this is from Michigan, USA.
Okay. Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about, I mean, I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about stages, and so has Jumpstart.
So the Third Frontier crafted they call it the commercialization framework to better evaluate opportunities within the ecosystem. And they look at companies from the imagining stage, what we kind of consider the ideas on the back of the napkin, to incubating, demonstrating market entry, and growth and sustainability. And I think it depends on the level of commitment and support of the government as to what stage is best to enter into that ecosystem. In some cases, as in Ohio, there is support at the very earliest stages to help evaluate an idea and help a potential entrepreneur understand if the idea is viable, if they should make an investment of time and resources into that on a personal level, and if it should go forward. And I think it's really important at that stage that the entrepreneur get a sound, reasonable response to their idea. Sometimes it's not a good idea and they need someone to tell them no. We talk a little bit about, in Ohio, the fast no. And the fast no for an idea that's not fundable, that doesn't have legs, that can't move forward, is really important because that may save the entrepreneur from investing their child's college fund, taking a second mortgage on a house, maxing out their credit cards, all of those things for an idea that really isn't going to go anywhere. Committed entrepreneurs will come back with a new idea, and I think Lee can speak to that. But I think it really comes down to what assets and resources are available. If there are assets at that very earliest stage, then by all means, work with those assets and understand if there is an opportunity there to form a company. If it's later, be cautious and use the next stage of resources that are available to you.
Great. Let me ask Charu a question. Charu, there was a comment in the chat this morning, actually, from Alexandra Fraser from Cape Town, South Africa. She had made this comment, and I'd love to get your reaction to it. She said, from a private funder's perspective, when assessing government-backed business for follow-on funding, they are often, quote, uninvestable, as they have unclear and unfeasible business development plans and are not sufficiently differentiated or commercially viable or scalable. I mean, you've sort of proved the opposite of that. You've gotten government money along the way, but then you've been able to attract private capital. Any sort of thoughts on this challenge or maybe sort of a taint of that government investment may make a private company look less attractive than if you had only raised company purely from the private sector?
Yes. So I think in general, that stereotype has arisen because of primarily university research availing of federal grant vehicles like SBIR, SBPR, to take an idea that's really lived in the academic domain and kind of grow it to a commercializable step. At least that's my experience. Whereas with the Third Frontier, we've had 3 different junctures at which we've taken the grant money. And the first step was we already had the company started. We had a full-fledged business plan. And our product being 80% medical software, we needed to build a team. We needed to write our first prototype software to conduct clinical studies with the device. So we had a very clear pathway and a very clearly defined steps, which, as Suzanne mentioned, we had a very, very clear step that was value creating, not just for the business, but also a key milestone for fundability as well. And the Third Frontier grant application is very focused on that commercialization because there's matching money vehicles, there is a job creation, there is also key milestone metrics that every quarter we submitted reports for, that really show that the business is moving forward and that you're not in a perpetual R&D cycle without any commercialization plan. And at 2 different stages, we took money to develop a new technology that broadened our market. Again, a full-fledged business plan just for that new market. And we also took a whale of money for developing our first commercial prototype. So we had to put the financial model in place to show how we would put these systems out and what would be the launch strategy and what kind of money we were expecting, etc. So it's a very commercialization-focused model, and we have had no trouble at all. In fact, that was never an issue.
Great, thanks, Charu. Let's go to the chat room.
Yes, we have a question from Theodoros.
Go ahead, Theodoros.
Go ahead, Theodoros. You're live.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And where are you located, Theodoros?
I'm in Greece, in Thessaloniki.
Great. Welcome. Our first international question.
I would like to ask Mr. Stephen Koltai about how easy to make entrepreneurship in the Balkans today. Which are the advantages and which are the disadvantages?
Great. Stephen, could you hear that?
I did.
Great.
You know, one of the first things I always say is that entrepreneurship is hyper-local, and it's not regional. It's one of the reasons why I'm so interested in this whole course, by the way, because I think that this idea of looking at Northeast Ohio as the Cleveland area and Northeast Ohio as a specific ecosystem is so very important. You can't talk about entrepreneurship in the United States. You can talk about entrepreneurship maybe in Northeast Ohio, but what is true in Northeast Ohio is entirely different in a different part of the country, much less in different countries. So I think it's very difficult and not terribly helpful to talk about entrepreneurship in a region. The Balkans happens to be an area that I have not worked in very much, so I can't really address the particulars in any case. But I really think that you have to talk about, certain parts of certain countries. So I'm very interested in hearing and learning more about Greece, where I have not worked, because I imagine that even within Greece, there's a big difference probably between Thessaloniki and Athens, much less some of the provincial parts of the country. So I'm afraid I can't really comment on the Balkans region.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Let's go back to the chat room. Anna?
We have a question from Kevin from Ohio. Considering political aspects of government funding, how is government fund productivity measured and reported in returns? What might lead to public favor or opposition, and is it risky to let it carry the ball for too long? That's
Lisa.
So the success measurements for the kind of economic development activity that the Third Frontier supports are very challenging. And so early on, we looked at private investment. I mean, money is an easy thing to measure. So we looked at follow-on investment, smart, new, and meaningful money, the state calls it. So if private investors were putting money into an opportunity, risking their own capital, that was a pretty good sign that it was a viable opportunity. If more money came in at the right stages based on milestones and need, then that was a good indicator that the company was continuing to grow and build. Politicians like jobs. And that's one of the first things that they talk about when they campaign is we're going to create more jobs. Well, in the stage of companies in which the Third Frontier operates, jobs are really a trailing indicator. So you don't get 15, 20, 50 jobs in a startup. You might have 15, 20 people that are working for it, but they're generally not getting paid. And so the Third Frontier likes to measure people that are actually getting a salary.
With the green thing right now.
So the success measures became follow-on capital, leveraged money, and access to the market, commercialization of products, customers, sales, and so forth. So if you base your metrics on things that are firm and things that are reportable and quantifiable, it's easier, and politicians can get comfortable with that once they understand what it is you're measuring and why you're measuring it and how it's being measured.
Great. It looks like our friend Moez is back. Moez, can you hear us? Can you say hi? Moez, can you hear us?
Yes. Hi, everyone.
Oh, great. Okay. Welcome. Good. You built up the anticipation for us. Let me ask you a question, and thanks for your patience in joining us. I know sometimes technology doesn't always cooperate. Moez, in the clip that we used in the video lecture, you had talked about a scheme in Tunisia where entrepreneurs, as you said, weren't putting very much skin in the game. I think the program you referred to involved 96% funding from government and 4% funding, private funding. So not really the kind of match, sort of 50-50 match we've seen here in Ohio and other places. Maybe you can talk in a little bit more detail about some of the challenges when government maybe is providing too much funding and not enough private dollars are coming in.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Michael, and hi to everyone, and thanks for having made the introduction to me, and thanks for being patient. So let me take the dive. The other panelists, I think, they will discuss what the role of the government, what the government should do. And you're right, I can tell you what the government should not do, in fact, because, it is highly costly to the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Tunisia. So basically, for decades, the government of Tunisia has sponsored a lot of initiatives, financial instruments, mechanisms aiming at promoting entrepreneurship. But the problem is that, we are seeing the opposite problem. The government is too generous and is providing, in some financial schemes, basically is providing up to 96% of the total amount of the project. And of course, the entrepreneur just put 4%. So he's not really motivated to run the business, and he has no skin in the game. That's right.
Great, thanks. Anna, a question from the chat room?
Yes, from Andhra Pradesh in Hyderabad, India. How do you think a country laden with many private and international organizations can help cater the needs of entrepreneurs if the government is very corrupt?
First of all, thank you for staying awake to our friend in India. Lee, do you want to try to address that one?
Wow.
Not that I'm saying anything about corruption in Greece, but...
Again, I think I have to go back to sort of the key tenets in my thinking of how a program like that could work. I talked a little bit about transparency and accountability before. One of the things I think makes this program work here is the use of third parties to vet ideas, to stand as outside critics, subject matter experts, an objective resource that's sort of beyond reproach, specific to a single project at any one time. So you almost have to have this level of objectivity, in my experience, to make something like that work. Having said that, I can't possibly imagine, whether it's India or some of the other countries of our participants, I can't possibly imagine all the complexities and all the possible ways that corruption can infiltrate and affect the local environment. It's a hard one to overcome at best.
And Charu, I'll put you on the spot, even though I know you still have family in India, but you live here in the United States. Any thoughts about? You alluded to it a little bit about what your impressions of government sort of coming from India and here. Any comments on the question?
I can't say that from personal experience, but I understand what the caller is referring to a lot, because I do have other friends in India that have started businesses that are entrepreneurs. They're very successful, but they have not taken any government funding. In fact, they've try to leverage the private sector as much as possible, or else get money from friends and family to maintain independence and control over the business.
Great. Thanks, Charu. Anna, is there another question from the chat?
Yes, from Ioannis. How to cooperate and ensure the continuation of your business moving forward with a government that is possible not to be there after the next electoral period? Are there ways and measures you have found and have already used in Cleveland to avoid this issue?
Great question. Lisa, do you want to?
Sure. I think, a business has to become sustainable on its own, and an ecosystem has to become sustainable on its own. So the notion that we will always depend upon the third frontier in Ohio to support these programs, I think that's a flawed notion. We have to move to the point of sustainability on our own, and we can't expect that the government will always be there. So you build in contingency plans. Even as a successful entrepreneur, you have to understand that your prime customer may not always be there, and you have to diversify your portfolio as an investor, as a business owner, or as a government, to make sure that you're investing in as wide an area as is feasible, and that you're investing in ways that make sense for the long term. And sometimes that's, planning for the withdrawal of support from a certain sector, and you look for new resources. Hopefully those entrepreneurs who lose government support will find support from their customers or from the investor community.
Right. I'm sorry, go ahead, Lee.
It may be important to also explain that even the Third Frontier program is not one single effort. It approached multiple aspects of this, right, whether it was entrepreneurship or accelerators or university research. So the efforts that went through each one of those streams also spread on their own volition and are different stages. So the chances of this continuing beyond any one administration, I think, are multiplied because of that.
Moaz, maybe I can ask you, Tunisia has gone through, a major political reform is sort of an understatement, and even since the revolution, there's been changes within the Tunisian political environment. Any thoughts for someone who's sort of working with entrepreneurs and there's different programs being put in place? How does that play out in Tunisia, this kind of patient approach that may span beyond the life of some of the elected officials or the parties in power?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Michael. In fact, when we work with Tunisian counterparts, we try to make sure that we work with Tunisians, with reform leaders. We make sure that those reform leaders, basically, they will not be subject to any political pressure. So it is actually difficult to work in an environment where we have had sort of five governments, since the beginning of the revolution in Tunisia. But whatever, you are on the right side of the equation, or you are more on the left side, more socialist rather than liberal. I think everyone agrees that there are needs for structural reforms. So I really believe that the revolution has created an opportunity for the private sector and the public sector to sit together and sort of discuss, have a policy-related discussion and put in place a framework that is favorable for entrepreneurs and private sector development in general.
Great, thanks, Moaz. Question from the chat room.
We have a question from Moses. Moses, you're live. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Where are you calling from, Moses?
I'm calling from Kenya.
From Kenya, great, welcome.
Oh, thank you. I have two questions. The first question is it preferable for the government to create a conducive environment for trade, or is it better if government solicits funds from donors or getting grants and then pumps them to entrepreneurs? Two, what channels can we use to ensure that the cash reaches the entrepreneurs, that it is beneficial to the economy as a whole? Because, for example, in Kenya we have programs like youth funds, but most of the times you find the cash does not reach the youth. It just gets lost somewhere in between. I'm afraid it goes back to the same same pockets that are giving them out. So what mechanisms can we have to ensure that the cash is channeled to the right people?
Great, thanks, Moses. I don't know if I caught all of the questions, but I don't know, Stephen, do you want to try, based on what you heard from Moses, do you want to try to address those questions?
I had a very hard time understanding.
Okay, hold on one second. Suzanne from our team is going to reread the question. Thanks, Moses.
The question that was into the chat before we went live was accountability and a credible channel to use when offering support to entrepreneurs is a challenge. What model should the government adopt in cases where capital support or even soft loans is required to reach the very people of whom they are intended?
Great, thanks, Suzanne. Stephen, I don't know if you could hear that. Do you want to try that?
Well, I mean, I think that, one of the questions about, whether government money should go directly to enterprises is a core issue. And as I said in the beginning, I personally am not in favor of programs where the government is investing directly, and this is true, by the way, whether it's a development agency from outside the country or whether it's inside the country. Now, having said that, there are a great many examples of successful government-funded programs that have ended up investing in particular companies. For example, in Kenya, where I think the caller is from, DFID, the UK's development agency, which is the second largest development agency, bilateral development agency in the world after USAID. USAID has about a $30 billion a year development budget, and DFID is about 15 billion pounds. DFID was one of the early investors in Safaricom, which of course is the company that is the parent of the M-Pesa, mobile money product in Kenya. Now, the particular case there is interesting because the investment was made by DFID through several intermediaries, which ended up investing in Safaricom. But DFID itself, which did have approval at the end of the day, did not initiate or even do the primary diligence around the transaction. It simply was required to approve the decision that was made by a third party. And so having third-party experts involved as intermediaries, which I think another panelist has already talked about, is one very good way to prevent, the corruption and the other problems that we talked about. So I do believe that official development funding should go into companies, but not directly from the funder.
Great, thanks, Stephen. And Moses, thanks again for calling it for Kenya. Mzuri sana, as we say. I remember my 10 words of Swahili. Do we have something from the chat room, Anna, or should I go to the next?
Yes. Please talk about the other components of the entrepreneurship ecosystem and the important roles that they play in this context. This is coming from somebody in the audience. For example, Case's Coulter Center funds research that may have commercial potential. Second example, Entrepreneurship Engineering Consortium supports undergrad students, et cetera. And there may be others that you can highlight.
Okay. Let me reframe that, and maybe Charu, I'll bring you into the conversation. For both those here and in week 4 of the course, hopefully you'll still be with us then, we have a whole session on what I'm calling leveraging anchor institutions. But Charu, maybe you can comment about, I think, Case Western Reserve, which is our home university and where you did your biomedical engineering degree, looked a lot different for entrepreneurs 10 years ago. Maybe you can sort of comment on what the situation was like when you were starting your company, and then what changes you've seen to the ecosystem, really through the support of donors and government to help better support entrepreneurs that may be coming out of a university setting. Charu, did you hear the question? All right. Moaz, can you hear us? Okay. I don't know if anybody can hear. Can you guys hear us on the... Charu, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Did you hear my question about changes over the last 10 years in the university setting from when you started Cardio Insight, how things have improved for entrepreneurs on Cases campus and on campuses in general?
No, actually, I just heard some music.
Okay, how can we get the I think maybe we have Moses's music still on, which is very peppy. No? We're not sure? Okay. Charu, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so again, the question is, what changes you've seen over the last 10 years on campus at Case Western, just as an example, how universities are better supporting entrepreneurs on campus, really given the support of donor and government funding?
Yes, so there are a lot of programs, hybrid programs, if you will, that Case is offering. Program, the STEP program, student initiatives that are funded by government dollars that are bringing entrepreneurship awareness into the curriculum. So if it's I'm familiar with the engineering program. Really, if you're working in biomedical engineering, it's not just about doing linear algebra and knowing electronics and life sciences. It's about, okay, you're going to build a medical product someday. What is it going to take for it to be a successful medical product? What are some of the regulations in the regulatory environment? How should the pricing of your medical product be? What markets are going to be in? So I do think that there's certainly an entrepreneurial orientation. We have hired several fresh graduates from Case that are much more prepared to work in an entrepreneurial environment, and also are really gaining the work experience so that they can springboard to starting companies of their own. That is something that I didn't see among my peers 10 years ago, or that thinking was just not there, but it's everywhere now.
Great, thanks, Charu. Moaz, any comments from you about what the role of institutions is playing in Tunisia, and then the support of government programs to help sort of enable institution engagement and entrepreneurship?
Yes, absolutely. So to me, the government should be playing 2 or 3 roles. Basically, the role number 1 is making policies, that are conducive for entrepreneurship. And by policies, I mean laws and provisions that encourage or at least boost the entrepreneurial ecosystem. For example, just quick maybe example, laws that can facilitate research-based spin-offs, typically, or a law that will give a status to business angels. Those individuals are really active in the early stage investment. The other role of the government is, it can be a fund provider as well, meaning that, I as a government will put $1 to encourage you from the private sector to put an additional $1. It's called matching. And what the government should not do is manage those funds, because, the government is subject to public financial management rules, and it's not as flexible as private, institutions. So it should give a mandate to those, to a third party institution to manage the money. And I think that the Third Frontier Fund, I've got the opportunity to collaborate with Liz, and you, Mark, as well. And this is absolutely fantastic. This is the right example of financial institutions sponsored by the government and doing really great investment, to promote early stage investment. So again, fund provider, but not a fund manager. And the third leverage of the government, that should not be used is to provide a tax break. And what happened, unfortunately, in Tunisia is that the government says the following: okay, I will encourage private capital to be invested into regions, and in exchange for that, I will provide you with some tax breaks. And it did not attract the right players. The players who came and invested were banks, and banks are very much risk-averse. So it did not really attract, a real venture capitalists. So that's a little bit, in a snapshot, the lessons we have learned from Tunisia, and now, hopefully, things will move toward the right direction.
Great, thanks, Moaz. Why don't we take one more question from the chat room? Anna?
Great. This is actually from Matt in Cleveland in our audience. Stephen referenced the importance of local support and politics. Are there programs forthcoming in Cleveland that can further support local efforts? The U.S. government's Jobs Act has stalled, but does support the idea of community involvement and support. It relinquishes the micro element of government support. Any thoughts?
It's sort of a big topic, maybe kind of a brief thought.
Well, it is a big topic, and I think the Cleveland ecosystem is evolving. There are opportunities that are present now that weren't present before, new loan funds and new asset classes, new opportunities in that sense. I think the federal government does play a large role in, again, as a catalyst in encouraging local communities to act and to make policies that are in alignment. Frankly, people follow the money. So if there's a federal program that offers money for entrepreneurship and good support, and it makes sense for a community, I think the community will do its best to access those resources and to build up its own ecosystem along the way. I think the Jobs Act presents some opportunities like that. But it's a leadership question for those people that are running local government here in Northeast Ohio.
Great. Maybe what I'll do is just to sort of end, and maybe I can start with our folks on the phone. We'll end here. Maybe just sort of a final thought or comment. And Stephen, maybe I'll start with you. Just given, again, sort of the global audience out here and some of the discussion in the MOOC, any kind of final thought or comment, Stephen? Stephen, we can't hear you. No. Let's pass it. Charu. Okay, we can't hear Stephen. Okay, Stephen, one more time.
Oh.
Okay. Okay, Stephen, try one more time, please.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay. What I was going to say was I thought there were several really interesting points that have been raised so far in the conversation. I think that the idea of, the localization of these programs is, has been emphasized. And I also think that the idea of having third-party intermediaries, which do a whole bunch of positive things, including bring in experts who really know what they're doing when it comes to, evaluating specific business opportunities, as well as, frankly, being a sort of an arbiter, an observer that prevents as much corruption. Is also really good. So those are two big takeaways for me from the conversation so far.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Charu, any last closing thoughts?
Entrepreneurship is a very local phenomenon, and the variables are very local. And for a place like Cleveland, which is small and well-networked and group of individuals with really good universities and great intellectual property coming out of them, I do think that the Third Frontier program and the Ohio government has played a very key role in helping catalyze, just because of the scope and the focused approach. And I think that there will be other ecosystems, entrepreneurial ecosystems that could benefit. And I would encourage other entrepreneurs to move away from the preconceived notions of leader set and the stereotypes and look around, because there is a lot of money if you do have a strong business plan, the passion and the drive and skin in the game. There is a lot of government money to be had. It may not be for everyone, but it certainly is a great opportunity that entrepreneurs should look into.
Great, thanks, Charu. Moez, a couple final thoughts?
Yes, in fact, entrepreneurship is the key to economic growth, but we would like to focus on what we call high growth, high impact entrepreneurship. And you have a bunch of people that have done or conducted some research, which highlight, basically those research highlight the importance of nurturing, of creating an environment that is favorable to entrepreneurship, and especially high growth, high impact. And I believe that government, especially in emerging economies, should take a very bold initiative and say, you know what, I'm going to create a $1 billion fund that will be uniquely directed to fund startup companies. Unfortunately, it's not enough done, and the countries which have done, I mean, this have succeeded. I have the example of Singapore. I don't know much about it, but at some point they have created a $1 billion sort of fund that has focused on entrepreneurship. So, and now look, I mean, Singapore is really doing great, I mean, in terms of economic growth and so on. So I believe the other emerging economies should, I mean, invest a significant proportion of their budget into this segment, which is risky, but it is rewarding as well.
Great.
For the economy and for the people.
Thanks, Moez. And just a couple quick points here, Lee.
From my perspective, I guess it's tempting to think of government as one body. And in reality, we talked a lot about what the state of Ohio has done through the Third Frontier program, which has been absolutely staggering and really impressive. It's also important to recognize, however, that there are a variety of programs at the federal level. At the county level, Cuyahoga County has done a lot locally to help spur entrepreneurship. And it takes an entire village, as we say, in the sense that I think we have counted pretty close to 200, at least well over 100 participators in this ecosystem. So it takes an incredible amount of effort from many and varied sources to create this support.
Great, thanks, Lee. Lisa?
Well, I'll echo that. I think as we were putting this course together and we were thinking about the stories that we wanted to tell, and I particularly was thinking about the story I wanted to tell about the Third Frontier, people often focus on the money. $2.3 billion is a huge amount of money by most anyone's standards to invest in entrepreneurial development and innovation and the building out of an ecosystem. But it's just money. I mean, without the other assets, without the philanthropic community, without the individual donors, without the economic development organizations and the county organizations, the incubators and the accelerators, the money would just be money. It's all of those pieces parts. And what I hope that people will learn from this course and from these conversations is that there are assets and resources everywhere. They're different. They're different in scale and in scope and in the feel of them, but they are everywhere. And the smart thing to do for communities and for entrepreneurs is to figure out what those are and to help get them organized into a line that makes it work. As an entrepreneur, you have to have a lot of different things to make your business work. As a community, you have to have a lot of different things. You have to figure out what you do best, do that, and let the person who does the next thing best do that. Maximize the resources you have, especially if you don't have enough.
Great. Well, we're on time. We did it in an hour. Thank you, and I'm sorry for people on the Webex that we didn't get to everybody. What, was there one more?
No, I just wanted to say really quickly so that the folks on the Webex can hear this also. There have been a lot of really great questions that have been coming in through the chat window that we've not had a chance to get to. We want to let everyone know whether you dropped off a question at the table or you sent one in from Greece. We're going to be posting those to the forums in the MOOC so that everyone can continue the conversation after this point. And please, if you've not registered for Michael's MOOC yet, take advantage, get registered on the Coursera platform. Michael will be doing one of these events every week for the 6-week run of the course. So there's some really valuable conversations that are going to be had over the next 6 weeks, and we'd love to have as many of you engaged as we can possibly get.
Great. And the price is right, free.
Go Greece.
Yeah. So thanks so much for taking the time. The next one of these is actually going to be May 8th at 7 p.m. So a little bit better, more user-friendly for our folks in Asia. And that will, the topic next week will be the role of philanthropy. So thanks to Jumpstart for hosting us today. Thanks for those in attendance, and for those on the Webex, thanks for staying up late or getting up early, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.